What happens when an empath finally stops caring? Most people think the answer is simple. They imagine a person becoming cold, distant, unfeeling. They picture bitterness replacing kindness and indifference replacing compassion. But that is not what really happens. What really happens is far more powerful, far more unsettling, and far more transformative than most people will ever understand. For years, the empath walks through life carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry. They become the listener, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who notices every shift in tone, every hidden frustration, every silent cry for help. They learn to read rooms before they enter them. They learn to absorb tension before anyone speaks. They learn to prioritize everyone else's comfort over their own peace. And because they do it so naturally, people begin to expect it. People become comfortable receiving what they never earned. They become accustomed to the patience, the understanding, the forgiveness, the second chances, the third chances, and sometimes even the 10th chances. They start believing the empath will always be there, always available, always understanding, always willing to sacrifice. That is where the mistake begins, because every act of giving has a cost. Every moment spent carrying someone else's burden requires energy. Every time an empath ignores their own needs to rescue someone else, a small debt is created inside them. At first, the debt feels manageable. Then it grows. Then it compounds. Then one day they wake up and realize they have spent years investing in people who never planned to invest back. And something changes, not all at once, not dramatically, not with an announcement. The transformation begins in silence. The empath stops explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop chasing people who enjoy being chased. They stop pouring energy into relationships that function like emotional black holes. They stop volunteering for battles that never belonged to them. The world often mistakes this moment for cruelty. It is not cruelty. It is clarity. For the first time, the empath sees the difference between helping and enabling. They see the difference between compassion and self-destruction. They see the difference between being needed and being used. And once that distinction becomes clear, it can never be unseen. People around them start noticing the shift. The phone calls become less frequent. The endless emotional labor disappears. The automatic forgiveness is no longer guaranteed. The empath no longer rushes to repair every broken situation. And suddenly, the people who benefited most from their generosity become uncomfortable. Why? Because the system has changed. The supply they depended on is gone. The emotional safety net they took for granted has been removed. Many will try to pull the empath back into the old role. Some will use guilt. Some will use criticism. Some will accuse them of changing. And for once, they will be right. The empath has changed, but not in the way they think. The empath has not become less caring. They have become more selective. Their compassion now has boundaries. Their kindness now has standards. Their energy now has value. And that is what makes them powerful, because the most dangerous person is not the one who never cared. The most dangerous person is the one who cared deeply, understood completely, gave endlessly, and finally realized their worth. That person can no longer be manipulated through obligation. They can no longer be controlled through guilt. They can no longer be trapped by the fear of disappointing others. They have discovered something stronger than approval. They have discovered self-respect. When an empath finally stops caring about the opinions designed to control them, they start caring about the truth. The truth is that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your energy. The truth is that some people only appreciate your presence when they fear losing it. The truth is that loyalty without reciprocity becomes exploitation. The truth is that sacrifice without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And once an empath accepts these truths, their entire reality changes. Their confidence grows. Their decisions become sharper. Their relationships become healthier. Their life becomes quieter. Not because they have fewer emotions, but because they have fewer unnecessary battles. There is a calmness that emerges when someone finally stops trying to save everyone. There is a strength that emerges when someone finally stops seeking validation. There is a freedom that emerges when someone finally understands that their value was never dependent on how much they could endure. The empath begins choosing peace over performance, authenticity over approval, respect over acceptance. And something remarkable happens. The people who genuinely care remain. The people who only cared about access begin to disappear. The noise fades, the confusion fades, the exhaustion fades. What remains is a person who knows exactly who they are, a person who no longer apologizes for having limits, a person who no longer negotiates with disrespect, a person who understands that protecting their energy is not selfish, it is necessary. Because the greatest lesson an empath ever learns is this: your heart was never meant to be a public resource. Your kindness was never meant to be a permanent emergency service. Your compassion was never meant to come at the expense of your identity. And when you finally understand that, everything changes. You stop shrinking. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop explaining. You stop carrying what was never yours. And in the silence that follows, you discover a version of yourself that had been waiting all along, stronger, calmer, wiser, unshaken by manipulation, unafraid of rejection, unafraid of being misunderstood. Because the moment an empath finally stops caring about the demands that drain them, they start caring about something infinitely more important: their own life, their own purpose, their own future. And that is not the end of their compassion. It is the beginning of their freedom. There comes a point in every empath's life that no one talks about. It is not a dramatic breaking point. It is not a moment filled with shouting, slammed doors, or emotional explosions. It is much quieter than that. In fact, most people miss it entirely. The empath still smiles. They still show up. They still perform the routines everyone expects. But something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. The endless internal negotiation has ended. For years, they asked themselves impossible questions. Maybe I should be more patient. Maybe I should try harder. Maybe they are going through something difficult. Maybe if I explain myself one more time, they will understand. Maybe if I love them enough, support them enough, forgive them enough, things will change. The empath becomes trapped inside an exhausting cycle of hope, not hope based on evidence, hope based on potential. And potential can be one of the most dangerous illusions a person ever falls in love with. Potential convinces people to stay where they are not respected. Potential convinces people to invest where there is no return. Potential convinces people to wait for transformations that never arrive. The empath often sees the best version of people long before those people become it. They see hidden strengths, hidden talents, hidden goodness, hidden possibilities. The problem is that seeing who someone could become is not the same as accepting who they are, and eventually reality wins, not because the empath becomes cynical, but because truth becomes impossible to ignore. They begin noticing patterns they once excused, promises that never become actions, apologies that never become change, words that sound sincere but produce identical outcomes. The same disappointments repeated with different explanations, the same wounds reopened with different excuses. At first, they resist these realizations. Nobody wants to admit they have invested years of emotional energy into something that was never growing. Nobody wants to accept that some people enjoy receiving support more than they enjoy becoming better. Nobody wants to believe that certain relationships survive only because one person keeps carrying all the weight. But truth has a strange way of making itself impossible to avoid. Eventually, the empath sees the entire picture. Not the picture they hoped for, not the picture they imagined, the picture that actually exists. And when that happens, a new type of strength emerges. A strength many people mistake for indifference. The empath no longer feels compelled to react to every disappointment. They no longer rush to defend themselves against every accusation. They no longer spend sleepless nights trying to fix problems they did not create. The emotional hooks stop working. The guilt stops working. The manipulation stops working. The pressure stops working. Because, for the first time, the empath realizes something profound. Not every problem deserves their attention. Not every crisis deserves their energy. Not every opinion deserves their response. This realization changes everything. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks for years. At first, you barely notice the weight. You adapt. You compensate. You convince yourself the burden is normal. Then one day, someone removes the backpack. Suddenly, you understand how heavy it truly was. That is what happens when an empath stops caring about obligations that were never theirs. The relief can feel almost shocking. The mind becomes clearer. The emotions become steadier. The future becomes brighter. Not because life becomes easier, because unnecessary suffering finally ends. Many people become uncomfortable when an empath reaches this stage. They accuse them of becoming selfish. But what they really mean is this: you are no longer sacrificing yourself in ways that benefit me. Those are two very different things. Selfishness takes from others without concern. Self-respect refuses to be taken from. One is exploitation. The other is protection. And the empath finally learns the difference. They stop measuring their value by how much pain they can tolerate. They stop measuring their worth by how many people depend on them. They stop measuring their importance by how much they give away. Instead, they begin asking a different question. What kind of life am I creating for myself? That question changes everything, because when the empath turns their attention inward, something extraordinary happens. The energy that once fueled unhealthy relationships now fuels personal growth. The energy once spent chasing approval now builds confidence. The energy once wasted on constant rescue missions now creates purpose. The empath begins evolving, not into someone harder, into someone stronger. There is a difference. Hard people build walls. Strong people build boundaries. Hard people stop feeling. Strong people stop tolerating what damages them. Hard people close their hearts. Strong people protect their hearts. The empath who finally stops caring is not becoming emotionally unavailable. They are becoming emotionally intelligent. They understand that unlimited access does not equal love. They understand that endless sacrifice does not equal loyalty. They understand that suffering for others is not proof of virtue. The greatest transformation is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery terrifies people who benefited from emotional chaos, because chaos creates control. Chaos creates dependency. Chaos creates confusion. Clarity destroys all three. The empath becomes harder to manipulate because they recognize patterns faster. They become harder to deceive because they trust actions more than words. They become harder to control because they no longer fear losing people who refuse to respect them. That fear once held enormous power. Now it holds none. The empath finally understands a truth that changes the direction of their life. Anyone willing to leave because you develop boundaries was never staying for the right reasons. Ride that again. Anyone willing to leave because you develop boundaries was never staying for the right reasons. Healthy people respect limits. Healthy people appreciate honesty. Healthy people understand balance. Only those benefiting from imbalance become threatened when balance appears. And that realization frees the empath from years of unnecessary guilt. For so long, they believed keeping everyone happy was their responsibility. Now they understand something different. Everyone is responsible for managing their own emotions. Everyone is responsible for their own growth. Everyone is responsible for the consequences of their own choices. The empath can support, encourage, inspire, guide, but they cannot live someone else's life. They cannot heal someone who refuses to participate in their own healing. They cannot save someone committed to self-destruction. And they cannot keep setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. The moment this lesson fully sinks in, a profound peace arrives. Not excitement, not revenge, not triumph. Peace. A calm certainty that no longer depends on external validation. A confidence that no longer requires constant reassurance. A stability that no longer collapses when others disapprove. This is what people misunderstand about empaths. They assume kindness is weakness. Patience is weakness. Forgiveness is weakness. Sensitivity is weakness. Until the day the empath walks away. Then they discover those qualities were never weakness at all. They were choices. And the moment those choices are withdrawn, everyone sees how valuable they truly were. The empath finally understands their greatest power. It was never their ability to endure. It was never their ability to forgive. It was never their ability to carry everyone else. Their greatest power was always their ability to choose where their energy goes, to choose who receives their attention, to choose what deserves their time, to choose what remains in their life. And once they reclaim that power, they become unstoppable.